This is my horror story, and sadly, it happened on Valentine's Day while I was working at a sports bar and restaurant. We have this group that comes in every Thursday night after playing co-ed volleyball. My coworker had them the week before and said they ran her ragged, barely tipped 10%, and complained about their bill being too high, even though they ordered 7 alcoholic drinks and a ton of extras. The ironic part? They all work for a popular attraction park in town, and one of them is a manager at one of the park's 6 locations. I used to work for him, so I thought maybe they'd tip me better since he remembered me. When they came in that night, I offered to take the table, hoping for a better outcome. They were a handful, special orders, split checks, and endless requests for extra ranch and barbecue sauce. One kid went through 12 glasses of sweet tea. Not a huge deal, but it was a lot of work. They had a coupon for a free dessert, so I made it, comped it, and split their checks. I added a suggested gratuity to make sure I got paid for all the effort I put into serving them. They seemed happy, thanked me, and left. But when I went to clear the table, I saw they'd crossed out the gratuity and left me a 6% tip. I was furious. Next Thursday, they're getting 6% service from me. The end. About 11 years ago, I was living on the west coast of the U.S., a 23-year-old woman finally getting a taste of independence in my very first apartment. I was balancing work and college, too busy to think about dating. But with Valentine's Day coming up, a coworker decided to play matchmaker and set me up with a guy named Jack. Jack and I talked on the phone for a few days before meeting in person. When we finally met, he showed up with flowers and candy and immediately told me how attracted he was to me. Then, with a confident smile, he said, "You're my girl now." It caught me off guard. After all, we had just met, but I brushed it off because he was charming, tall, and had a great smile. He seemed sweet. We spent the next few weeks hanging out, but it didn't take long for me to notice red flags. Jack was clingy, obsessively so. He constantly wanted to know what I was doing, got upset if I had other plans, and ignored my friends and family when they visited. He wasn't violent, but his possessiveness was overwhelming. He even told me he loved me after just a month. I laughed it off, thinking he was joking. Then, out of nowhere, he got down on one knee and proposed. No ring, no real relationship foundation, just an out-of-the-blue proposal. I told him we'd only known each other for a few months and we weren't ready. He insisted we could go to the courthouse immediately and that he'd get me a ring later. I declined. A week later, he did it again. This time, I started feeling genuinely uneasy. It was too much, too fast. So I told him we should take a break. He got quiet, his expression unreadable. Then, with a smile, he agreed. For a few days, I didn't hear from him. Then one evening, I came home and found him sitting on the staircase outside my apartment. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Waiting for you," he said with a grin. It creeped me out. I told him he needed to leave. He did, but then he started showing up randomly. He'd knock on my door for 30 minutes straight, leave, then come back. He'd wait outside my apartment so often that I had to start hiding at my neighbor's place until he was gone. He called nonstop, but I ignored him. Then, after months of this, he just disappeared. I felt relief, thinking he had finally moved on. Then, 3 months later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered. It was Jack. He wanted to check on me. Said he told his mom about me and that she wanted to meet me. I got chills. I told him to lose my number and never call me again. Instead, he started knocking on my door again. Each time, I had someone else tell him to leave. Each time, he just smiled and said, "Okay." The third time he showed up was the last straw. My best friend answered and told him I wasn't there. I was, but hiding. Jack asked if he could come inside and wait. When she said no, he tried to push his way in. My friend called for me, and I ran to help her shut the door. My heart was pounding as I yelled that I would call the police if he ever came back. He mumbled something through the door, then finally left. I regret not calling the police that night. Fast forward 5 or 6 months. It was a sunny Saturday. My 2 younger sisters were visiting. I had a migraine, so I was in my bedroom with the door open, half listening to them watch a movie. Kids were playing outside. Nothing felt off. Then, bang. I flinched, but assumed it was a stray basketball hitting the door. Bang. Again, louder. My sisters shouted, confused. Just as I started to get up, bang. Screams. Then a man's voice, "Get the hell up." Panic set in. I had no idea what was happening. My heart racing, I made a split-second decision. I closed my door, blocked it with my dresser, and called 911. I could hear my sisters crying. Then I heard the man's voice again. "Where's your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." My blood ran cold. Then one of my sisters said, "She's in the room." My heart nearly stopped. I don't know if they said it out of fear or panic, but the next thing I heard was my bedroom door being kicked, hard. I could feel the dresser shift. He kept kicking. "If you don't open this door right now, I'm killing everyone." I was sobbing, begging the 911 operator to tell me where the police were. I could barely breathe. The whole ordeal lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Then, suddenly, silence. He was gone. Shaking, I finally opened my door. My sisters were trembling. I blurted out, "Who the hell was that?" "Jack." In broad daylight, Jack had kicked in my front door with a sawed-off shotgun and threatened to kill us. The police caught him a week later. That's when I learned something disturbing. A few weeks before my attack, Jack had already been in trouble. He was found firing a shotgun in the air. When the police questioned him, he claimed someone had broken in, stolen his weed, and cut the tip of his tongue. The cops gave him a ticket and let him go. I helped police catch him by tracking down a relative's address. They arrested him as he was headed there. He confessed but later pleaded not guilty. Eventually, he took a plea deal and only served 5 years. The scariest part? When he got out, he moved into a halfway house down the street from my old apartment. Even though it's been over a decade, I never feel completely safe. I move constantly. I change my number every year. I always carry pepper spray and a taser. I check my locks religiously and still put a chair under the doorknob before bed. Because deep down, I fear that one day, I'll hear that knock again. Earlier today, I was scrolling through Instagram and saw an ad for a memorial locket. It reminded me of something I'd wanted to do a year ago, keep a piece of my late boyfriend's hair close to me. Let me take you back a bit. In August 2022, I met an incredible man. He was a bit wild, loved riding his motorcycle, but he also had the kindest heart. We dated for months, and everything felt perfect, until one tragic day. He was on his way to pick me up for a date when a drunk driver hit him while he was riding his bike. He didn't die immediately, but he was in a coma for 3 weeks. I spent every single day by his side in the hospital, holding his hand, hoping for even the smallest sign of improvement. But his condition worsened, and he eventually passed away from complications during his treatment. His passing happened just before we were supposed to celebrate our first Valentine's Day together, which made the loss even more painful. Losing him shattered me. I'd always believed in the paranormal and felt sure that if he were watching over me, he'd send a sign. But when nothing happened, I started to doubt my beliefs about the afterlife and the supernatural. Then, last March, something changed. An out-of-town friend visited and ended up borrowing my car. Since she rides a motorcycle, we switched vehicles. I hadn't been able to ride since the accident. I'd even sold my own bike, but this forced me to get back on one. One evening, I was riding home, listening to music through my helmet, finally starting to feel at ease again. As I rode past a familiar bluff, a spot he loved and spent hours at, looking out over the valley and the ocean, I saw him in my mind's eye. He was standing there, waving at me, and I even heard him call out my name. My heart raced, but at the same time, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. I made it home safely, though I was still shaken by the experience. I collapsed into my living room with my dogs around me, half of my riding gear still on, and even laughed a little at how strange and real it all felt. Later that day, while browsing on my phone, I came across an ad for a memorial locket. It hit me that I still hadn't bought one to keep a piece of his memory close. I smiled sadly and thought, I should get that. Just before dinner, I turned on my TV to watch something from a streaming app. I don't have cable, my landlord is cheap, so my TV only shows feeds from my streaming apps. But when I turned it on, I was shocked to see my late boyfriend's favorite internet news website on the screen. At first, I was confused. I asked my current boyfriend if he'd set it up, but he shook his head and asked, "What is that?" I turned pale, sat down suddenly, and started to cry. This website isn't easy to find, and as far as I know, we'd never watched it at my place, only at his. I'm pretty sure you even need a login, so I have no idea how it showed up on my TV. My current boyfriend noticed my reaction and hurried over, wrapping his arms around me. He gently asked what was wrong, and I could barely speak. All I managed to whisper was my late boyfriend's name. Instead of brushing it off or trying to explain it away, my current boyfriend just held me close. He softly reassured me, saying, "He's saying hi to you." Then, without hesitation, he turned to the TV and said out loud, "Hi, Gary." I turned off the TV and let out a shaky laugh, repeating the same words. Then it hit me, this weekend would have been the 3rd anniversary of our first date. I don't know why it took him so long to send a sign, but it brought up a lot of emotions. Now, I'm left wondering if I should finally get that memorial locket, not just to keep a piece of him close, but to honor the love we shared and the signs he's still sending from wherever he is. It was the start of my second semester in 2016, and I had a few new classes. In one of them, I met a kid named Ben. I'd never seen him before, but he seemed friendly. During class, he came over and asked if he could have my phone number. He said he wanted to keep in touch and maybe talk about schoolwork. I thought he seemed nice, so I gave him my number without thinking too much about it. After that day, Ben and I started texting every day. At first, it was just simple messages about classes, homework, and our interests. We'd talk in the hallways and during class, and it felt like we were becoming friends. But by the second week, things started to change. Ben stopped talking to me as much. He'd only ask if I was okay and wave at me in the hallways, which I didn't think was a big deal. By the 3rd week, he just smiled and said hello sometimes. But in the 4th week, things took a strange turn. Ben started following me everywhere at school. No matter where I went, he was there. If I went to the bathroom, he'd wait outside the door and follow me silently when I came out. He never said a word, and his eyes always had this empty, unfocused look that made me feel uneasy. It was already February, and despite the time passing, Ben continued to follow me all day long. I began to feel like I was never alone. I tried everything to make him stop. I changed the hallways I walked in, took different routes between classes, and even altered my schedule to avoid him. But nothing worked. Ben was always there, watching me with that blank stare. I grew more scared and irritated by his behavior. Then, on Valentine's Day, Ben gave me a stuffed elephant. He didn't say a word, just handed it to me and walked away. I said thank you, but he stayed silent. Later that night, I received a text message from him. When I opened it, my heart pounded with fear. The message only contained the address of my house. I felt a mix of anger and terror. I couldn't sleep at all that night, and I decided that in the morning, I would talk to my school counselor about it. I'll never forget the image of his eyes, that blank stare burned into my mind. I felt foolish for waiting so long to talk to someone about what was happening. Even though Ben had never actually hurt me, the fear kept building up inside me. After a long, sleepless night, I went to school early the next morning and headed straight to my counselor's office. I told her everything, how Ben had been following me, how the text with my home address had made me feel unsafe. I even showed her the message on my phone. My counselor listened carefully, took notes, and reassured me that I'd done the right thing by speaking up. When I left her office, I felt a wave of relief, but also dread. Ben was in my first class, and I was terrified to face him. But when I walked into class, Ben wasn't there. I found out later that he'd been taken to the counselor's office. For the rest of the day, I didn't see him at all. He wasn't following me, and I was finally able to focus in class. That first period was the last time I ever saw Ben. He never came back to school, and no one even mentioned him. It was as if he'd never existed. I was happy he was gone, but I still keep the stuffed elephant he gave me. It sits in the corner of my room, where it doesn't get much attention. Sometimes I wonder if I should get rid of it or just leave it there as a reminder of how important it is to speak up when something feels wrong.